They couldn't keep up with the rising tide.
I think that the electric company, Commonwealth Edison, really deserves a pat on the back. They moved quickly, they knew what to do. We're a system that exists on energy provided by electricity, and we learn the lesson of what happens when we don't have the electricity.
When you're covering one part of a story, that's your whole focus. The first day I was there, I was supposed to do the people that were under the ground, the real heroes, the people right on the front line working against the water. That's the day they did the first day. I didn't care what was going on at the river at that point. Those people were battling the floodwaters underneath the buildings, and that was my story.
It's a dirty and dangerous job, but somebody has to submerge into the bowels of the loop buildings and keep these floodwaters under control.
The only thing we're doing now is rotating the crew because of carbon monoxide. We're not getting enough ventilation in here.
Dean McKeag works for a private contractor and does this for a living. He's even been in this building's basement before, but the flooding was 3 feet, not 35 feet.
I've never seen anything like this. I've been in this building before, 2 floors down, so I don't know.
Not everybody's getting paid for their efforts tonight. Volunteer firefighters from over 80 nearby communities are fighting the rising water in the Loop's government buildings. They have never seen anything like this before either.
It starts at about 5 foot and goes up. Past those doors back there. Where does that go to? Parking. Is the first level of the parking all underwater? As far as I know it is. Higher than a car? Yeah.
Sandbags, pumps, and perseverance keep the waters from washing out the food court in the State of Illinois building. In the basement below, it's like a tropical rainforest. Every pump in the city is being used, and this one keeps going out. If it breaks down for good, the basement floods and these guys are in trouble. And they're all volunteers. Why do they do it?
There's a lot of guys out there that are more than willing to come in and give a hand anytime they can. So it's the old volunteer attitude, I guess. Everybody wants to help out.
I think that there was an attitude among some of the workers that this may be a problem that we couldn't solve. I know that some construction workers say, you know, maybe we're not going to be able to put this thing out until the river drains and simply comes up to the level of the river, and we're going to live with it permanently. Others were more confident that they could do it. They just needed time.
And time was essential in tackling the floodwaters. Hi, I'm Steve Baskerville, and now we're going to discuss the role that science played in the Great Chicago Flood. The first science principle we saw in action was hydrostatic pressure, which means water always tries to seek its own level. So when the Chicago River, which was 15 to 20 feet deep at the Kinsey Street Bridge area, found its way into Chicago's freight tunnels, which go down to 45 feet, that water rose, filling the tunnel as it tried to reach the level of the river. But just how to reverse this principle was a problem that engineers faced. Their first task was to bring the level of the river as low as possible. Just how do you do that? By emptying it into the Gulf of Mexico. That's right, the Gulf of Mexico. Gates are opened at the electrical powerhouse in Lockport, where the water rushes into the Illinois River. Now from there, it flows to the Mississippi River, which in turn empties into the Gulf of Mexico. Once the river level is lowered, water can be pumped out of the tunnel. But that must be done at the same rate that it took to fill it, in order to avoid our next scientific principle, something called negative pressure. According to the Army Corps of Engineers, if water is pumped out of the tunnel faster than outside air can get in to occupy space vacated by the water, a negative pressure results. This means the pressure outside the tunnel will be more than the pressure inside. And that greater pressure outside pushing inward could cause the tunnels to collapse. So it's extremely important to empty the tunnels at a slow but sure rate. In this case, it took 22 days or 2 inches of water per hour.
Fix.
Second day was a bit of surprise because we hadn't solved it yet. You wake up in the morning and we are attuned to quick stories, and someone has found a solution. The hijacking is over. The tornado is past. We're beginning to rebuild. I came in as a newsman wanting to say, problem is over, now we're in the rebuilding stage. We couldn't do that. We haven't filled the hole yet.
And again, it was a trial and error. Let's try this. Let's build this dike. Let's pour this concrete. Let's try these rocks. And slowly, they seemed to be stopping the leak.
There was a major shift in emphasis today. Construction crews all but abandoning their efforts to build a dike around the damaged section of tunnel. Instead of trying to plug the hole beneath the river completely, they've decided to seal off the damaged part of the tunnel. This was the hard part, actually finding a spot where you could drill straight down 47 feet to the top of the tunnel without hitting water or sewer or gas lines. In some cases, it took several tries. Once the small drill struck pay dirt, it was time to bring in the big stuff. Ironically, engineers say this was the easy part.
Each of these casings is 57 or 58 feet long. They were sinking it down to the very top of the tunnel, then filling around with concrete so they can get down and break into the tunnel itself.
Once those so-called caissons were lifted into position and lowered down in the holes, they were held there by the huge cranes, while welders attached steel beams to keep them suspended above the ceiling of the tunnel. After that, cement was poured into the hole to create a flat surface just over the tunnel.
Why is it necessary?
Well, that's so we can get a clean access into the tunnel without any cave-ins or whatever.
You could see the caissons sticking out from holes drilled on both sides of the river. Eventually, there would be 6 holes, 2 on the east side and 4 on the west, which consulting engineers familiar with the tunnel recommended as the best way to seal off the damaged section, in essence making it part of the river bottom and completely stopping the flow of water under the loop.
I remember the press conference as the officials are trying to pin down who knew what when, and suddenly they turn on a videotape that was taken back in January of this cable crew just happened to be going and televising and recording the exact tunnel, the exact place where the leak occurred. What a remarkable thing to have as documentation. That tape shows the city has known about troubles in the Kinzie Street tunnel for weeks. This is a live picture of the site tonight. Workers still trying to stop the underground flood, which has disrupted thousands of lives and caused millions of dollars in damage. And for the first time, this videotape, shot by a cable company crew way back in January, provides an incredible look at what is causing all the trouble. It shows a cable company worker climbing over a collapsed section of the tunnel, then wading through heavy mud and water.
In the videotape shot in the Kinzie Street tunnel in January, there's dramatic evidence that the wood pilings penetrated the tunnel. Listen and watch closely as the cable TV cameraman describes what he's shooting.
This is not a cave-in. It appears to be a piling of some sort sunk in right next to the tunnel here. I count probably 3 deep and 3 across. They look like they're wood.
You never put piles near a tunnel that's underwater. It's something that's not done.
But it was done, and the disaster clock began ticking. Still, the fact that there was trouble in the tunnel was not discovered until mid-January, 3 months after the pilings had been installed. It was then that the videotape of the damage was shot. Pictorial evidence of the cracking and crumbling, the 3 to 4 feet of mud and silt. And a few weeks later, in February, the city's Department of General Services was notified. But the first city inspection did not take place until March 13th. On March 16th, the Department of Transportation was notified. 9 days later, there was yet another inspection. Then on April 2nd, the seriousness of the problem was detailed in an internal memo from Chief Bridge Engineer Louis Kunze to Acting Transportation Commissioner John LaPlante. In it, Kunze tells LaPlante, this wall failure should be repaired immediately due to the potential danger of flooding out the entire freight tunnel system.
That's the best evidence that I have seen so far. To me, there's no question anymore. And I missed
the evidence in the videotape.
Yeah, I missed that the first time around.
I think many people did. We were so taken by the pictorial content of that videotape, we didn't listen carefully to the words that were being spoken, and sure enough, there they were. This is not a cave-in, the cameraman said. Look, there are wood pilings here, 3 across and 3 deep that have penetrated the tunnel.
You can see them, right?
It's amazing, yeah, amazing evidence. I was spending a lot of time on the phones trying to talk with people I knew at City Hall to determine what was known about the search for villains in the piece. And at some point that day, the mayor came down himself and they played the tape for the first time for the media. While the Daley administration's primary goal at the moment is plugging the leak or leaks and stopping the rising water, the Corporation Council's investigation is continuing into possible city negligence in all of this. And that investigation tonight has claimed its first victim. This is the man the Daley administration has singled out so far in its investigation, Acting Transportation Commissioner John LaPlante. The longtime municipal bureaucrat has been fired. LaPlante allegedly dragged his feet in repairing this major damage to the Kinsey Street section of the tunnel system. A Chicago cable TV crew videotaped the crumbling tunnel in January, vividly showing the cracks and gaping holes, the standing water and the mud and silt that was knee-deep. Although this videotape was made in January and the city was notified in early February, no repairs were made.
This was a serious problem that required immediate repairs, and it should have been expedited. This morning, I have requested and received the resignation of Acting Transportation Commissioner John LaPlante. This problem was brought to his attention. He failed to act, resulting in a major problem that could have been avoided.
LaPlante did not act to repair the tunnel immediately as an emergency procurement project. Instead, he began a time-consuming process of seeking bids.
It didn't occur to me that this was a serious problem, because we did know that the damage was due to the pilings going in back in September, and since there had not been any problem since September, wasn't aware that there could be a problem that quick. Would another week or two make a difference? Obviously it did.
This investigation is by no means complete. We are still sorting out who else was responsible, including other city employees, contractors, and anyone else involved. This was not a minor oversight. The cost to the city, business community, and the people of Chicago will be enormous.
It was pretty dramatic stuff at the time, but again, this was a very angry mayor, willing to go out and be the bad guy, willing to go out in front of the television cameras on live television, because we were all live, and be the guy who was firing the guilty parties. He didn't leave it to someone else to announce. He did it himself.
What you had to do is just find out who was accountable and who had the responsibility. And what we did is I put Kelly Welsh in charge, who's my corporation counsel. They interviewed a lot of people, and it came down to 3 or 4 people who had full responsibility, who didn't make the decision. I don't like to fire anyone, but you have to do it, because if they're in charge, you don't fire the secretary, you fire the person. And I asked the person, and the one person left. I mean, he was a commissioner. Took it in stride. He said, that was my responsibility. Fine.
It's rich and thick, but a third less fat than regular sour cream.
There's like an ant farm under there that we don't know where it begins, we don't know where it stops. So many individual projects have been done on that. So many bulkheads have been put in that we don't know about, and the Army Corps of Engineers didn't know about, and the city didn't know about, that the water would run, hit it, go this way, hit there, go this way, hit there. It was like a maze. And that's why it was such an impossible task for anybody to remedy this problem.
We really didn't have a good look at those tunnels. We knew that there was a narrow gauge railway that carried coal back in the early days of Chicago from one building to another that honeycombed 40 feet down, 40 feet below the entire loop. But we didn't have a good grasp of it until Dawn Stensland went down into a tunnel that led from the Field Museum back into the loop. We saw the cars. We saw that it was remarkable construction. Those walls were a foot thick. Quality of the old craftsmen. We knew that they weren't going to break, actually, that the water simply was flowing through, but that it had a perfect channel right to the basements. And we learned a crucial fact, and that was that many buildings had sealed the entrance from those tunnels to their basements. They were spared. Others had done a poor job, and it began to break through cracks. Others hadn't done it at all, and they were the most seriously affected.
This is the Chicago Loop, 40 feet down under. We're walking 1,500 feet between Lakeshore Drive and Michigan Avenue. Engineer Norm HIFI has worked in these old freight tunnels for 19 years.
These tunnels look like they're in pretty good condition. Does that go for all the tunnels? You've been in all those that are flooded right now?
Yeah, I've been in some of the tunnels that have been flooded, and they all are they were in pretty good condition until the water happens.
HIFI says the flooded tunnels look just like this one. Up until yesterday, they were the forgotten passageways that once rumbled with rail cars full of merchandise, coal, cinders, and even the U.S. mail.
These are some of the original cars that were here when the building was first built.
This is one of the only dry tunnels deep beneath the Chicago Loop. I want to show you something up here. Because of this indentation, you can see just how thick these walls are. 1 foot. Pure concrete. That's why all the engineers are telling us these tunnels are sturdy, even though they were built back in the 1920s.
This part of the loop tunnel system didn't flood because it's one of the only places above the water level of Lake Michigan and the Chicago River.
This same water that we're seeing down here, this is actually the flood water.
Yes, that's river water at that level. It was about 15 feet from where we're standing right now. That was the highest level it ever reached, and that's after all of the tunnels were flooded and it had reached probably the river level.
It's good that we can see these tunnels and the good condition they're in, because a lot of people think, oh my God, the crumbling infrastructure. And what you're saying is it's pretty good.
They were engineered very well and built to last, and they've been here for a lot of years.
By day 2, the workers were starting to show some signs of fatigue. But they were pretty good-spirited.
These are the people who've been working all night, and whether or not they'll tell you out loud, they are all thinking,
I'm very tired, yo. I'm very tired.
By noon, Gene Duckworth's logged 30 hours. The fatigue of no sleep while replacing pumps overnight, it's just now paying off. Water levels seem to be dropping.
It's tough, real tough, you know. All this equipment we're bringing in and out, it's just, you know, tough.
It is tough, too, for David Velez, hauling pipe building to building overnight. He realizes the necessity of
just moving around, keeping myself motivated and everything. Try not to slow down, because once I slow down, it starts taking a toll on you.
At this point, the water has gone down at least 10 feet at this point.
Jerry Becker has to recover 15 more feet of basement at Carson Peary Scott, a job that seems
hopeless. You know, the hopeless feeling of, there goes all that equipment that'll be underwater probably for 2 or 3 days, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Nothing but shovel away silt left by receding water.
It's going to take quite a while.
Meantime, these pumps and these people will continue on deep in the basements underneath the loop.
And slowly, the story comes out that, well, we wanted to have it solved in 2 or 3 days. Now it'll be 2 or 3 weeks. It was kind of a resolution that we had a serious problem that was going to take much longer than we had originally estimated.
It was a miserable wet day. There was lightning, and the lightning was the biggest problem. The drilling was stopped on Wednesday morning for a while because of the lightning. You know, everything that was against them, could be against them, was against them.
Finally, then, the divers come in to save the day. And indeed, they became the heroes because they had hands-on.
These divers that would normally be out somewhere under a nuclear power plant, which isn't a mundane project, but they don't get the type of publicity that we were giving them, all had a real sense of pride. I think we had one diver who said it was just, I'm going to get the exact phrase. The diver said, we saw that Chicago needed help and we were glad to come. I mean, they're the type of comments you got. These guys were all wearing white hats.
Roger and 3 other divers were at it once again late today, surveying and measuring for ComEd. As far as anyone knows, they are the first people ever to underwater dive in the murky waters under the streets of the city. And despite the conditions, they all say they wouldn't want to be anywhere else. What are some of the stumbling blocks? What are some of the things getting your way down there?
Stumbling blocks would be we have no visibility, we have currents down there, we have known conditions because of the way the water poured in. Things have been moved and changed around, things hanging from the ceiling, cables and ropes.
Roger and his partner Peter Murray are down from Milwaukee for this dive. They specialize in dangerous assignments. But on this dive, Peter runs into some problems. He doesn't have enough weight on to fight the current and debris. There is a chance he could be trapped.
All right, we're going to abort the dive, Pete. Come on back, okay?
Peter is quickly pulled back up to safety, but wants to go back in the floodwaters immediately. If you ask them why they do it, they'll give the answer most heroes give. It's their job.
You gotta be crazy, I think. Almost, yeah. You always really have to love the work, too, in order to dive in this stuff.
And a job like this, which is really difficult, to try and find a remedy for these people, for us, is really being part of it. It's really important to us.
It's difficult to imagine men like Roger Chapman swimming in darkness 100 feet under the Board of Trade. Yet you'd see them, like old-fashioned cowboys, laughing at the danger they faced.
I've always wanted to come to the big city, you know, do a little swimming. So I guess what I'm doing now.
The weirdest part of the story was the day the water started rising again. I was out covering that night, and nobody could explain that water just was coming from some unknown source, and for some unknown reason the water was rising. That was a worrisome part. That was, I think 2 days before the Army Corps of Engineers came in with those massive pumps.
What you're looking at is dramatic evidence of tonight's big flood mystery. A mystery as thick as the veil of mist being churned up by those 4 huge pumps. Pumps that are trying to clear 40 feet of water in the basement and sub-basements of the city-county building. Now, we were in the stairwell yesterday, and I could walk down 2 more steps without getting wet. Workers here tell me that the water is coming up slowly, 1 step at a time. Their fear tonight is the water will continue to come up and then knock out a communication system on the first floor. That's why they're just trying to hold their own, and so far, it's a losing battle. To make matters worse, the water from City Hall is streaming into the walkway to the State of Illinois building, a building that was dry just yesterday, forcing them to sandbag the entrance and hope the stream doesn't turn into a river.
We're still getting water seepage from City Hall, primarily from the handicapped elevator shaft at the pedway portion of City Hall.
But not everyone in the loop is fighting a losing battle tonight. The building manager at 126 South LaSalle is happy to report after 3 sleepless nights, he can almost see the floor of the sub-basement.
Water level was approximately at this level, which we estimate to be 11 feet.
That almost covered this doorway?
5,000 square feet.
Man.
And so if we move down to this area here, we would be underwater. Okay, we've got about 42 inches now left, and we're maintaining the water flow and getting it out.
My test for a story is when people start saying, okay, enough already. When is a story wearing out its welcome, is the way I always put it. Well, this story took a lot longer to wear out its welcome than most stories I've ever been involved in. There was just an insatiable interest on the part of the public, and I think the reason for that is that no one really knew how it was going to turn out.
Faced with new delays, which could add up to big trouble, divers are taking a new hands-on approach, staying underwater as much as 2 hours at a time, and doing a lot more than simply observing the progress of the pumps. Bathed under floodlights, the chilled night air is still a lot warmer than the water below. Divers are emerging after spending a lot more time underwater. For the first time tonight, they are actually operating new electric pumps brought in to deal with debris a lot tougher to get out than anyone thought. After the debris was removed, the plan had been for a diver to go down and place an inflatable rubber bladder called a pig, then return to the surface as concrete was pumped down to complete the plug. But all the debris limits the bladder's effectiveness. So on this side, the concrete alone will have to suffice. Mayor Daley again came to check on progress this afternoon, bringing with him Chicago Congressman Dan Rostenkowski. They watched as divers like Shane Albertson went about their risky business.
I was kind of nervous the first jump down. Second one wasn't bad, and then the third one, easier.
Our cameras weren't able to follow Albertson below the surface, but his own camera, attached to his diver's hard hat, provided our first pictures of both the descent into the pylon and conditions below.
Does that feel like good solid concrete in the tunnel? Yeah, it feels pretty strong.
There was extreme concern about whether the pylon was securely set in the rock and stone. On the way up, the lone diver realized he wasn't alone. Watch the fish swimming right in front of the camera.
It's very significant to people who have lived in Chicago for very long, because the Chicago River has been always so terribly polluted, no fish could live. It was Mayor Daley's dream to one day be able to sit on the banks and fish out of the Chicago River. He never saw that, but his son will. Living proof in this disaster. We have a fish that appeared to be 6 inches long, one of the first pictures to come up from the site. For the first time, we're getting to see the extent of damage to the entire CTA subway system, and it appears to be extensive. Channel 2's John Duncanson is live with the videotape just released by the CTA. John?
That's right, Bill. This subway station here, by the way, is closed and will likely be closed for some time. Tonight we've seen new evidence in 2 leakage areas. One in Union Station in a basement tunnel, and the second was a videotape, as you mentioned, released by the CTA tonight, showing the extent of the damage in the Dearborn-Milwaukee line, about 1,000 feet underneath the loop. You were looking at the first videotape taken yesterday showing water seepage into the Dearborn-Milwaukee subway, flowing into and over electrical boxes. The tape also shows workers trying to pour grout into leaks, both to stop them and strengthen the tunnel itself.
The latest estimate from the Corps of Engineers is about 15 days to drain the tunnel system. Certainly, we would have to have some time beyond that to determine what our status is, and, you know, as we have consistently said, we won't do anything until we're 100% safe.
Total repairs could range to $20 million. The videotape shows a 1,000-foot stretch of the line. It even reveals water sprouting up from underneath tracks. And there may be other tracks in trouble. The discovery of bubbling water in a basement tunnel beneath Union Station is enough to lead some to believe more is on the way. There are 3 tunnels under Union Station. The underground freight tunnel apparently filled with water, then pushed up into an abandoned streetcar tunnel. That now seems ready to fill Union Station's baggage tunnel, where mail is stored for delivery.
7-5.
For the first time, we began to really understand what was happening below, because in a huge life-size model that Larry Menti took us through, we were able to actually see the tunnel, the diver, what they were doing with the cement down there. And in a way that only television can do, explain it in a kind of living form, or walk us through the tunnel. It was like being there.
This is a disaster that's going to cost this city millions and millions and millions of dollars. It's a disaster that captured the attention of the city and the country for a couple of weeks. These people are getting on TV, these engineers, to explain how they're going to fix it, and nobody could understand. And that's where the model came from. And I don't think it was the engineers' fault. That's how they're trained to talk. And plus, it was all underground. We can't show it. So that's where the model came from. The beginning would be last fall, when the city claims that piling was improperly installed under the Kinsey Street Bridge, shoved into the bed of the Chicago River, and then down into an abandoned tunnel. At that point, it formed a crack in the tunnel. But after months of all of the Chicago River water pressure pounding down at it, a hole finally burst on Monday, sending water gushing through the abandoned tunnel and into the loop area, into the subways and the building basements. Now, right away, the city knew it wasn't going to be able to deal with the source of the leak because they had the pilings causing a problem. They had current water and all that pressure causing a problem. They had a vacuum for divers, and certainly a diver couldn't walk through here with all that water coming this way. It'd be like walking right into a fire hose. So what they did is they drilled 2 huge holes on the east bank of the river, one here and one about 20 foot away. One of them was going to be to stop the flow, and this was going to be like a utility hole for the workers to work through.
They put huge cylinders, steel cylinders, about 5 foot in diameter, so they could lower divers down here. And what they did on the cylinder farthest away from the riverbank and the leak was to first stop the flow, or at least slow the flow, so that those divers could work. They dropped 2,000 sandbags into the tunnel. On top of that, they dropped gravel, and then they filled the cylinder with concrete. Now, this slowed the flow. It did not stop it. That's important. Had it stopped the flow, of course, all the water pressure would have built up, knocked this out, and would be right back where we started. As it was, it slowed the flow to less than 1 knot, allowing a diver to drop down through this first cylinder. You've seen video of this in what we're now calling a torpedo. He went down yesterday for the first time into the murky, cold waters with 6 inches of visibility to do what is like exploratory surgery before the big operation. He had to check the conditions of the tunnel before they went ahead and tried to plug the leak. He was satisfied yesterday and went back up. He went back again, down again today, and today was mostly a cleanup effort. He was taking down these pipes, which was hooked up to a huge underwater vacuum to clear silt and debris from the bottom of the tunnel. That was important for the next step of the operation. The next step originally was supposed to be to install a deflated, what they've been calling a bladder. It's really just like a huge industrial strength rubber water balloon. And when the water balloon inflated, it was going to conform to the tunnel and knock off the flow again from the leak. Now, this apparently was not going to be enough. It was going to slow the flow but not completely stop it. Here, they wanted to stop the flow. This would have been big enough to hold back that water pressure. What they needed to do at that point was to send the divers down one more time, and this would have been a slow and laborious process. They were going to put sandbags in back of that water bladder. Hundreds of sandbags they had to carry down 1 or 2 at a time just because they were so heavy. Now, this was supposed to happen. Tonight, we got late word that they are 95% sure they are not going to use the bladder because the sandbags and the gravel has cut down the water flow to, like we said, less than 1 knot, and the water here is still enough now to then go ahead and just pour the concrete without the bladder. At first, they thought they needed still water. Now they're saying the water flow is now, because of this first operation, is now slow enough that they can go ahead and start pouring the concrete without the bladder. So that is going to start happening tomorrow. The concrete will start coming down this cylinder and fill up 20 feet. Now, this should be part of the permanent solution.
I think the Daley administration and the Kenny Construction Company and the others involved in trying to solve this problem were just glad to get any help they could get. And when the Army Corps moved in, there was a sense of we've taken a giant step forward. And in fact, the city had taken a giant step forward.
What is the critical window? At what point can you possibly begin to speed up the draining of that water?
We're going to start very slowly the first 24 hours to monitor how the flows are going and the water's flowing within the city. Once we've been able to determine that, we'll make an adjustment and increase the flows and see how well the system takes.
I recall the point when we could start walking in the basements, because prior to that, all you could see was a hole, and that was the stairwell going into the basements. The basements were flooded. So that by the time we could finally get in the basements, I remember walking around in waders.
Everything is in these rooms, completely covered.
It's like a scene out of a science fiction film, an industrial swamp, a concrete jungle deep in the earth. However, this movie is taking place inside the One North State Building, a building that filled with 60 feet of water Monday in only 3.5 hours.
Making this about 60 feet to here, to the bottom of the basements. We're down considerably since Monday.
Building engineer Andy Chura showed us the damage.
So all of the walling here is out. Everything in here is destroyed. There won't be anything salvageable wall-wise or material-wise down here.
The basements in this building were completely rehabbed 6 months ago. Engineers don't expect structural damage, but costs for lost boilers and air conditioning here alone will top $1 million.
You can find this in about 15 downtown Loop buildings, and there are 2.5 basements below us. There were 60 feet of water in this building. This is where Filene's basement was, at least their storage room. They've lost everything.
Army Corps of Engineers came in as if they dealt with this problem every day. It had a very calming effect on the city, and in a very methodical, professional way, they took all of the water out.
250 million gallons of water would fill the world's largest indoor pool at the Shedd Aquarium 120 times. 250 million gallons of water would almost fill up the Sears Tower. We found out Monday, 250 million gallons of water can immobilize a city. And now that the leak that poured all that water into the loop is plugged, the Army Corps of Engineers will begin its mission to help Chicago dry out. This afternoon, workers were laying pipe for the biggest water pumping project in history. What you're looking at is a shot 50 feet down into an open area of the flooded tunnel. This is where the Army Corps of Engineers plans to attack the problem first. This is where they're going to start the laborious process of slowly draining 250 million gallons of floodwaters through these pipes several hundred feet across Taylor Street to a drain, where then the water will go several hundred feet down below the surface and into the deep tunnel. For safety's sake, the pumping will start slow at 5,000 gallons a minute, lowering the water level by 3 inches an hour. The goal is to have the city dry by May 1st.
Mayor Daley and his corporation council today revealed results of their preliminary investigation, and those results have cost 4 city employees their jobs. In announcing the firings and suspensions, Mayor Daley's rationale was simple.
People should be accountable and take the responsibility. That's what we hired them for.
Daley listed those employees who've been held accountable and failed the test. Fired Frank Ochipka, the city's manager for the piling project at the Kinsey Street Bridge. Fired General Services Department employee Jim McTighe. He was the first city worker to inspect the tunnel damage. Chief Bridge Engineer Louis Kanza resigned today. The mayor says Kanza knew how bad the damage was and failed to move quickly to fix it. Also resigning, Dennis Sadowski, the engineer who failed to inspect the finished Kinsey Bridge piling project because there was no place to park. Corporation Counsel Kelly Welch suggests a series of mistakes by city workers and the Great Lakes Dredging Company at that site may have been the root cause of the flood. As the piling project at the Kinsey Street Bridge was underway in September, workers for Great Lakes Dock and Dredge began to have difficulty removing the old pilings. Because of that trouble, Great Lakes reportedly asked the city's on-site inspector if they could instead leave the old pilings in place and move the new pilings 6 feet farther out into the river, even though that would violate specific provisions of its contract with the city. The city's on-site inspector, James Bolster, who was suspended today, called his supervisor, the now fired Frank Ochipka, a city engineer, for advice. Ochipka gave his okay over the phone, and Great Lakes put the new pilings into their new positions, apparently puncturing the tunnel. All this happened, the Corporation Council says, despite this provision in the project contract.
Great Lakes shall not drive the piles at any other location than that specified by the city. The position of the piles shall not be changed to any degree, as even slight position changes may cause serious damage to various underground cables and structures.
What I learned from that the flood tunnel, we had the best engineers, architects, construction people, managers, laborers, engineers there. And I told someone from FEMA, the national administrator, this is a great resource that we have in this country. Just think of that. We got the best. And that's something that we should be proud of.
How does Sam break stone?
2 feet from the hole under the Kinsey Street Bridge that caused the Great Chicago Flood. Picture hundreds of thousands of gallons of water rushing through here up to the ceiling, all throughout the loop from the Chicago River. It took us 2 weeks to get it under control, not 1 or 2 days, as we had first hoped, but 2 full weeks to return to some semblance of normalcy. And what did we learn? We learned we could evacuate the loop in a relatively short period of time with few problems. We learned about this tunnel system 40 feet down. That could come in handy in the future. And a young mayor and his emergency team learned how to handle a crisis with no loss of life. These are the tunnels that have become as much a part of Chicago history as Mrs. O'Leary's cow. This was the Great Chicago Flood.
If you would like a VHS copy of this program, send a check or money order for $23.95 to the Great Chicago Flood, WBBM TV, P.O. Box 4400, Chicago, Illinois 60680. Allow 4 to 6 weeks for delivery.